Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Duerk, Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Miami. It's an honor to welcome you to the 4th Annual Smart Cities Miami Conference, co-hosted by the Institute for Data Science and Computing, IDISC, and the School of Architecture. It's an exciting time to bring this event together, even virtually, as it's an ideal forum for leaders such as yourselves to come together from academia, from industry and government, and closely examine innovation in the smart city field and in Miami's flourishing tech culture. With over 150 participants registered, the conference provides University of Miami and the surrounding community an opportunity to expand and have an open dialogue around health and well-being in the post-pandemic city, the theme for today's event. We will explore questions such as how can smart city technology monitor the emergence and transmission of contagious diseases? Will smart city technology be used to enforce compliance to safety guidelines? And what will be the consequences for individual rights and privacy? How does embedded technology, IoT, and digital media enable healthcare at home? I hope to find insight and collaboration at the conclusion of the conference. At we take pride in our diverse research endeavors and commitment to interdisciplinary research, and this event mirrors that. We continue growing our commitment to partnerships with regional and local academic, government, and community groups to address these important issues. Thank you for making this event happen today. It's through this work and conversation that we'll continue to expand our efforts. Now I'd like to introduce our esteemed Dean of the School of Architecture, Dean Rodolphe el-Khoury.
Thank you, Provost Duerk, for your welcome remarks. I too would like to welcome all of our participants and contributors to the 2021 edition of the Smart Cities Miami Conference. It is an honor to be able to share the work of our own University of Miami community, but in addition, we want to warmly greet our colleagues from other institutions and partners from government and industry who are joining us today. I wish also to take a moment to thank our gold sponsor, CARTA, the NSF-funded Center for Accelerated Real-Time Analytics. Thank you for your generous support that has helped to bring this event together. Now, as Provost Duerk mentioned, the conference is jointly hosted by IDISC, the Institute for Data Science and Computing, and the School of Architecture. Founded and led by Dr. Nick Tsinoremas, IDISC is the university's flagship for research and projects powered by advanced computation and data analytics. Focus areas range from climate and environmental hazards, computational biology and bioinformatics, data visualization, and smart cities. Now, this is the area where the School of Architecture and IDISC converge and collaborate on a number of exciting projects. These include, to mention just a few examples, the mapping of informal cities by means of drones and IDISC developed photogrammetry, a project, by the way, that is funded by National Geographic, experiments in large-scale ubiquitous sensing and data analytics involving different remote sensing methods and techniques. These were featured at the last emerge event, which we will recover hopefully next year. Schematic designs for Zen City, a smart city designed from the ground up in Mexico's Yucatan province. And more recently, health and well-being focused projects using emerging technology to develop healthcare in an expanded field, the very topic of our conference today. So the Smart Cities Miami Conference is meant really for to engage with the larger community, entrepreneurs, innovators that are reinventing Miami as an incubator for tech startups. The pandemic takes us online, however, this year. So we lose the exhibitors forum and the workshops, two engagement-focused components that we hope to recover next year as we reconvene in person for the 2022 conference. The crisis, though, is also an agent of accelerated change, prompting innovation in the swift response to COVID-19. and precipitating the transformation and disruption we had pondered in previous meetings. So despite the challenging circumstances and the reduced format, this is an important moment for the conference with so many changes, so much at stake, and so much potential in advancing the Smart City project. So we have an exciting program lined up for you, and let me just give you a quick overview. We begin with a keynote talk by Michael Mylrea, whom I will introduce in a moment. He will set the tone for the discussion of how technology is shaping the post-pandemic landscape. This is followed by session 1, a panel of experts expanding on the various dimensions of the topic and from different perspectives. This panel will be introduced and moderated by Dr. Yelena Yesha. Now I take the opportunity to introduce and welcome her as a close collaborator in mounting this, and I hope future editions of this conference. Yelena Yesha, an international leader in blockchain tech, is Chief Innovation Officer and Head of International Relations for iDisk. In this role, Dr. Yesha assists faculty in engaging government and industry partners and advises on developing research ideas into innovations. She is the director of the NSF Center for Accelerated Real-Time Analytics. Now, session 2 begins at 2:50 p.m. after a short break. We are calling it the UM Showcase because it features the unveiling of an ongoing project by a multidisciplinary UM team of faculty and researchers from several academic units, including the School of Architecture, the College of Arts and Sciences, iDisk, and the Miller School of Medicine. The second plenary talk follows, intriguingly titled, Your Digital Twin Will See You Now, How the Internet of Medical Things and Edge Analytics Are Changing Healthcare. Dr. Tsinoremas will introduce our plenary keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Wolff. He will also conclude the event with some closing remarks. Now, thank you again for joining us. We look forward to your interaction with our speakers by using the Q&A feature of the webinar platform. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Michael Mylrea. Michael Mylrea is Senior Technical Advisor to University of Miami Carta. He has led various cybersecurity R&D efforts for industry, government, and academia. As a cybersecurity executive at GE Global Research, he led the development of GE's first AI, ML-driven cybersecurity industrial immune system. Dr. Mylrea has 18 plus years of experience solving complex cybersecurity, energy technology, and national security challenges. He holds 13 plus cyber and blockchain patents and led cybersecurity products and R&D efforts, including one of the first and largest federally funded blockchain projects, credited, by the way, with ushering blockchain tech research to the national lab system. He launched and led successfully Ethical Hacking cybersecurity company and has held CISO and senior technical positions in industry and government, including GE, Pacific Northwest National Lab, US Departments of Energy and Defense, Deloitte, and Harvard Berkman Klein Center. Michael, I leave the stage for you, and thank you for joining us today.
Great, thank you, Dean Khoury. I am just trying to start my video with those technical accomplishments. Sometimes sharing a Zoom PowerPoint reaches my technical prowess limits here. So I'm trying to start my video. It says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. So if someone could enable my video, that would be excellent. While that's being fixed, let me share my screen. Okay. How is that?
Great. We see your presentation.
Okay, just give me a second here. So again, honored to give the keynote today. Before I get started, I want to give you a special thanks, Dean Khoury in the School of Architecture, as well as to Dr. Nick Tsinoremas and Dr. Yelena Yesha and the talented team at iDisk. Also wanted to give thanks to our partners at GE Research, Intel, DHS, S&T, and other leaders from industry and government that have enabled a very strong collaboration for some of the research I'm going to present today. This last year, the pandemic has fundamentally altered our day-to-day lives, our health, our security, economy, well-being. And so today, we have a world-class team of speakers that will explore cutting-edge healthcare and other innovative works in progress at the university. And I have the pleasure of discussing the challenge. And I'm specifically going to focus in on how the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation underway in the healthcare sector and some of the challenges related to cybersecurity, privacy, and interoperability, all challenges we're working closely with this exciting collaboration. So as I mentioned, the digital transformation for the healthcare sector is not new. It's been going on for at least 2 decades, where we've digitized and networked and automated and really unlocked incredible value in this space. So everything from telemedicine to essentially doing more with less, strategic planning, preventing human errors, increasing efficiency around patient admission and rate prediction, e-prescription, the list goes on. The challenges from a smart city perspective is how do we make these smart devices and systems and networks cyber smart? And the challenge really is that as we digitize and network, as we connect these medical devices, these systems, these wearables to the internet, we realize a couple of things, a couple of challenges. Is one, a lot of these systems and devices were never designed with cybersecurity in mind. So they were designed for functionality, ease of use, cost, interoperability. They've gotten really good at collecting, aggregating, exchanging these prodigious big data sets. So we've gotten really good at that. The challenge is, from the cyber perspective, is as we do that, as we increase that connectivity, as we increase the speed and size and volume of data being collected and aggregated and stored, that attack surface expands exponentially. The ability to hack networks and systems and manipulate and degrade and exfiltrate and steal data increases exponentially. And so we need to, again, going back to the theme, is how do we make our smart cities and smart healthcare sector and systems cyber smart? How do we design the future of buildings and facilities to be more resilient around that cyber challenge? I will talk a lot about the challenge. I'll talk a little bit about blockchain and how we're applying blockchain and AI to this space to overcome some of these challenges with a specific use case going on right now. And then I will conclude and open up for questions for a couple of minutes. So one of the challenges here is that a lot of the data being collected, and you're seeing we're at exabyte levels, 3,000 exabyte levels of data being collected from everything from health records to medical imaging, genomic sequencing, search engine data, pharmaceutical research. And so how do we collect that data and aggregate and store and share that data more efficiently without expanding the attack surface? It's not an easy task. With the unstructured data, it's also creating barriers and challenges around applying innovative next-gen approaches such as AI and machine learning. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out is both true for both blockchain as well as AI. So we need to also find ways to break down these data silos, overcome data lakes, and find ways to secure the data and exchange the data securely, while at the same time have data that's rich and clean and prepared and structured in a way that can be used and shared better. What I'm about to show you, I have not presented, but it's some recent research on what that attack surface looks like. Because we read about cyber attacks and hacking, every day we read about the next devastating report the next breach, whether it's SolarWinds or NotPetya. We've seen hospitals shut down. We see that the healthcare sector is the #1 targeted sector by hackers and other cyber adversaries. And so this next slide is some of my research that looked at the exposure, that specifically looked at the attack surface during the pandemic. And to no surprise, as we started working remotely, as we started realizing the gains from operating remotely, everything from telemedicine to doing trials and other things remotely, those systems that were never designed with cybersecurity in mind. They were never designed with basic encryption or authentication. Those systems were increasingly exposed as we started working remotely. And so this is just some basic high-level fingerprinting and mapping of the exposure across the United States. And so you see thousands of exposed databases, and these are just the ones that are public, not only publicly exposed, but also publicly exposed and vulnerable, and focusing specifically on those industrial control systems. So think of the array of things, the cyber physical systems that make our cities smart, that improve transportation and defense and health and energy. Those systems largely lack basic encryption authentication. They communicate in plain text. And what's happening is adversaries are exploiting those inherent vulnerabilities. One of the interesting things about the research is you see that some of the systems actually designed to secure our critical networks and databases and systems, they are becoming attack vectors. And so that's part of the challenge here, is that you can have the most secure device and system in the world, but if it's not properly designed or properly managed and deployed or patched, it becomes an attack vector. And so you see firewalls and VPNs, the virtual private networks that we're using to work remotely to facilitate telemedicine and diagnostic and predictive analytics. Those are actually becoming our attack vectors here. And so that's, again, part of the challenge. When we look specifically at what the exposure looks like in some of our largest cities, a number of cities that have become increasingly smart or digitized and networked, you see thousands and thousands of devices exposed. And so the challenge here, again, and as we see Moore's law play out, when the cost to deploy, the cost to store and exchange data, the cost of these devices, an array of things of IoT and industrial IoT, as it falls, we're seeing that Moore's law is playing out in a very negative way from a cyber perspective. And that as the cost falls and it becomes cheaper to collect, aggregate, exchange these prodigious data sets, we become less discerning on how we do it. For a number of years, I led pen testing, vulnerability assessment, red teams for a number of government agencies, where we go out and we conduct vulnerability assessments on what was called, smart buildings or smart facilities, everything from hospitals to military bases to national labs. And this is an illustrative slide that shows, again, as we network our campuses, our military bases, our other critical buildings and facilities, we need to design in a way that we understand how to identify and protect these critical systems. And so these are some of the common vulnerabilities you'll find in hospitals, military bases, other campuses, other critical facilities. And so that's the bad news. The good news is what it actually takes to secure these systems is sometimes it's just about getting the basics right. So if you work in a campus or hospital, do you have a good idea of what your critical systems and networks are, when they've been patched? Are they publicly exposed? So just getting that identify right can help you protect those systems. And unfortunately, because again, a lot of organizations are not getting the basics right, especially in the healthcare sector, we see that cyber management, it's broken. You're seeing that about 90% of healthcare organizations were victim of breaches. This was a couple of years ago, that number has increased. And then the numbers are devastating. So this is, you're looking at about $3,000 per victim, per attack. A couple of large organizations have even shut down, especially in response to vulnerabilities related to ransomware. And those numbers are important, but they go beyond just time and money. You see that reputational damage. You see that there's significant losses in efficiency, poor diagnostics, and also issues around the combination of human error, a cyber attack, reputational damage. The list goes on, and we read about it every day. More recently, we've seen researchers bring and raise awareness and attention to the issue around connectivity to some of these systems, where they showed a proof of concept where they were able to essentially operate an insulin pump remotely and deliver a fatal dose to the end user, or actually prevent insulin from being delivered. And so this is just one of many kind of really scary type attacks out there. Again, ransomware on hospitals is increasing. MedStar had to shut down a number of its critical systems. Lives have been lost because of these attacks. And then again, we see that the rising costs upwards now to $20 billion in damage caused to the healthcare sector. One of the areas that's increasingly important as we look at smart cities and the ability to start networking up other critical infrastructures. So networking up electricity infrastructure with defense, with emergency response, with education, with health. You see that as we connect these systems, well, not as sexy as cybersecurity, the number of potential privacy violations increases exponentially. And so this is one of the reasons and one of the use cases why a blockchain is getting so much attention right now, and that we can take those rich, thick, big data sets, and we can essentially have an asymmetric hash, so a secure encrypted hash of that data, and share that with other end users without exposing some of this PII and some other things that could lead to privacy violations, lead to cyber attacks, exfiltration of data. So absolutely cutting edge. I'm going to share a specific use case that we're working on with University of Miami, Intel, GE Global Research at the Albany Airport. And I hope after the presentation, you reach out to me and Yelena and Dean Curry, Nick Tsinoremas, about how you can get involved, because this is a really exciting initiative that continues to evolve and is very much about the future of smart facilities, of smart infrastructure, smart cities. So again, what are we doing about the challenge? I'm going to share one blockchain use case that's also heavily relying on some digital avatars and machine learning, again, at the Albany Airport. But I want to give just a short, quick background on blockchain. And I do that because usually when you bring up blockchain, people assume that you're talking about Bitcoin, and people, it quickly devolves from there. So blockchain at a high level is a distributed database or ledger that records transactions of values in a cryptographic signature, and that signature is inherently immutable. Blockchain smart contracts essentially transact when the contractual basis is met. So again, you have that inherently immutable, time-stamped, cryptographic, asymmetric signature, but a smart contract essentially executes when a predefined process or transaction is met. And so we're looking at some of these challenges. Again, how we collect and aggregate and share. We're looking at some of the challenges around ransomware and privacy. And we're looking at these attributes, these blockchain attributes, everything from the immutability to the decentralized database to cryptography. And we start to realize that blockchain, especially for the healthcare sector, can help us do more with less, It can help us overcome some of those privacy challenges with a privacy preserving technology. With ransomware, where an adversary targets your databases and locks it up, well, now you have a distributed database where the data is encrypted in transit and at rest. And you start to see that this could fundamentally change some of these big data, fundamentally change and help overcome some of the big data challenges, data silos, help break down these silos, data lakes. And it does that by changing how we trust. So diving down a little bit deeper, we see that we have improved data provenance. We have the ability to do event correlation. We have a time signature about when, where, and who accessed critical data. And then again, you have the ability to share it encrypted across various domains, overcoming a number of the different challenges we face in the healthcare sector, a number of the challenges we face in the smart city space. How does it do that? Again, I mentioned that there's a cryptographic hash, there's an immutable ledger that records those timestamps, but essentially you have this peer-to-peer transaction that can now happen without the use and need for a third party. So you're disrupting a lot of the third parties that are currently involved in the collection and aggregation exchange of data. And that truly is disruptive. And it was also one of the things we looked at first for this really exciting initiative we have underway right now. So GE Research has a large project at the Albany Airport that we're looking to scale and reproduce at the University of Miami. We have this project currently underway where we're looking at what does the future campus, what does a future hospital look like in a pandemic era? We know that the pandemic is now endemic and it continues to evolve. And so we need to evolve along with that. The underpinning the project is what we call a wellness trace app, which is secured by blockchain technology. And that essentially provides that data provenance in this platform for both airports as well as airlines to track COVID-19 screening, not only for passengers, but also for employees. One of our first use cases was to look at protocols for tracking the cleanliness of objects. So critical objects in the airport, aboard aircraft. And then as those touch points are cleaned at the Albany Airport, a member of staff enters that location and time into a platform that allows not only travelers, but also staff to access the app and see which areas have been cleaned, when they've been cleaned. And all of that is collected, aggregated with a timestamp. So if I'm a cyber adversary and hack into that database and try to manipulate that data, it's inherently immutable. We also are using facial recognition systems, working closely with Intel and other industry leaders to look at where people are located. Are people not following the distance guidelines? Are people walking around with temperatures in the airport? Did a person that had a temperature and asked to leave the airport re-enter the airport? So we need to figure out how to not only realize those goals, but how do we do it in a secure way? How do we do that in a privacy preserving way? And how do we do that through this entire life cycle of travel? So here's the wellness trace digital verified zone. You know, you can go with the app starting at an event to a ride share, airport, airplane, ride share, hotel. So you go through this loop, and through that app, you can essentially collect, aggregate, and be tracking your potential exposure to COVID along the way. And the app is not a panacea, but it's a way to improve that track and trace capability. And the use cases go on. This is one of many use cases. We want to better understand what this looks like on a campus, and not only through iDisk and the really talented team iDisk has with cybersecurity and 5G and blockchain, but also working with the School of Architecture is what is the future design for a military base, for a campus, for an airport, for a hospital? What does that look like? And how does the form of that design complement the function. And I think really, if we're able to figure that out and we're able to overcome some of these cybersecurity, privacy, and interoperability challenges, specifically with medical data, it'll help us not only protect, but share more sensitive data with more stakeholders for more purposes, while at the same time retaining the confidentiality, integrity, availability, privacy of that data. Because without those, what we're going to find, and I'll conclude here and open it up for questioning, but I think what we're going to find is that for our future smart cities to prosper and really bring in a new era of value creation, new markets, new services, new systems, cybersecurity needs to be part of the design and development criteria. And without that, we will, if we're able to realize those goals, I think we'll really be able to usher in a new wave of smart innovation that will continue to be disruptive and also overcome some of these major cybersecurity challenges that really are destructive. And so our smart cities will become cyber smart. That really is the goal of our initiative. And how do we do that in a post-pandemic era? I'm confident that we have the talented teams and organizations and partners to figure it out. And I really hope you reach out to the team at University of Miami, at IDISC, at the School of Architecture to partner up and collaborate with us on this exciting initiative. Thank you. I'll open it up now for some questions.
Yes, we have a couple of minutes for some question, and I see one that was sent by one of our attendees. Okay, I'm going to read this to you. Which blockchain are you using for the airport and other projects? Ethereum, and why did you select it?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to start out with a quick response to that. So one of the things I didn't mention with blockchain for the novices or folks that don't have a lot of background, I did mention it's different than Bitcoin. But one of the things to look at with any blockchain is the consensus algorithm. How does it arrive at consensus to say, for example, your medical device has machine state integrity? How does it do non-repudiation and data provenance? And one way to look at it at a very high level is there's proof of work or public blockchains, and then there's private proof of authority blockchains. That's just a kind of a very high level. We are looking at one of the solutions that I'm really excited about. And really, it's tough to talk about blockchain when you have Dr. Yesha as part of the workshop today. Before leading one of the largest federally funded blockchain projects. Before that, shortly after that, I joined Dr. Yesha's team. And Dr. Yesha has led the development of a Byzantine fault-tolerant Chios platform. I'm working closely with IBM and some other leaders in the community from the Hyperledger community. So I don't want to be a proponent for one specific blockchain. I think it's more important, similar to AI, is how are you collecting and aggregating and introducing that data to the blockchain? What should be on-chain and off-chain? How does that blockchain arrive at consensus? Does it have any potential prohibitive latency issues? And so with all of those, there's some great solutions out there, but I don't want to be a proponent for just one, because I think it very much depends on your use case. For the Albany Airport, what I will share is we're using a private proof of authority blockchain.
Great. We finished exactly on time. And thank you, Michael, for the very, very thoughtful presentation. So much potential, and I hope we will continue to work with you on the several projects.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate it. So I'm going to stop share here and then transfer it over.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yelena Yesha. On behalf of myself and Institute for Data Science and Computing, I want to welcome you to our first panel of the day, Health and Smart Cities, that I'm going to chair. Dean Khoury will assist me in moderating the questions. As we all well aware, the global pandemic and growing number of aging population introduced significant strain on the whole healthcare system as well as on the finances to support this type of infrastructure. So today we have a world-class panel that consists of luminaries from different global corporations that will bring their perspective on the challenges, technologies, and impediments that we are facing in addressing these issues. Before I introduce my panelists, I would like to set up the format for the panel. So I'll go through the quick introduction of our panelists, and then I'll be asking questions of some of the panelists, but everybody are invited to jump in. We would like to make this panel as interactive as possible, and Dean Khoury would also moderate the questions from the audience, so please don't wait until the end, as the question that I'll be asking and addressing, or as the panelists will be replying. Please post your questions in chat room, and Dean Khoury would select them and bring it to the attention of the entire audience. With that, I will start the introduction of our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Mick Bowman, who is a senior engineer and a world-renowned leader in the cybersecurity from Intel Lab, who works on decentralized cybersecurity and decentralized ledger. And he comes with several decades of experience in product development and research in this area. Our second panelist is Pierre Das. Dr. Das has over 20 years experience in research in imaging technology, neuroimaging. He's currently CEO of Neurotargeting Corporation, and also serving as Director of Digital Health at the Neuroscience Rockefeller Institute. Our third member of the panel is Jeb Linton, who is a world-renowned master inventor from IBM, who is CTO of Ecosystem for Cybersecurity, Cognitive Cybersecurity in Cloud, also Director of Center for Advanced Studies, Capital Area CAS, and done a number of exciting projects and products releases, as well as has a very significant patent portfolio that many people, even at IBM, are jealous of, I'm sure. So welcome, Jeb. Our fourth participant is Frank Ricotta, who comes to us with a significant experience in entrepreneurship and novel technological solution for resolving certain healthcare challenges. Currently, he is CEO of a very interesting, prominent startup, speaking of blockchain, that actually provide novel solution of and enable blockchain adaptation for solving complex healthcare problem with large amount of information. So we very much welcome Frank to our panel. And finally, we have executive from SAS Corporation. As you all know, SAS is a leading analytics company in the world. Pamela Tomski, that comes with us with, again, world-class expertise in AI, cybersecurity, and she's also managing a large portfolio of projects under DOE, EPA, and other national lab. And currently, we started a significant collaboration between IDIS and SAS actually will be providing a research platform that would power the technology, especially the technology that Dean Khoury and our UM team will be presenting in our second panel. With that, I would like to start our panel with my first question that would be addressed to Mick and Jeb and possibly Frank. What is the role of privacy-preserving cybersecurity, and what are the current state-of-the-art technology that you would like to share with the group here, and what are the impediments and what are the issues we need to work in this area? With that, Mick and Jeb, please address this question.
Sure. So when we talk about kind of privacy and how we balance kind of personal privacy with the social value of doing computation over large sets of data. It really brings into kind of conflict what our sets of objectives are. Right now, we can think about really three different approaches, I guess, that you can imagine for managing the computation in a privacy-preserving way. Physical isolation is the one that we're all kind of aware of and are being implemented. So if you think of private data collections in the Hyperledger Fabric platform, many of the federated learning algorithms are based on the same assumption, where the data stays in place and it stays physically isolated from it. So there are some benefits to that, as long as the data that's being computed on is really only accessible by those who are local. A second approach, which is starting to get some kind of real play these days, is what we call homomorphic or functional encryption, which allows the data to be computed on in a hidden way. So the data, even while it's being stored and computed on, remains encrypted, even though we can get some interesting answers out of it. It's a technology that's very promising. There's a significant amount of research going into making it practical. Its performance characteristics right now are a little, I'll say, rough around the edges. It's much less efficient than our traditional compute. And the final way, again, sort of depending on what your kind of risk tolerance is, would be hardware-based or compute-based encryption. So these are things like trusted execution environments that come from a variety of the hardware manufacturers. ARM, AMD, and Intel all provide compute environments that allow you to do computation on encrypted data. These have the nice benefit of the performance is essentially what you would normally get, but it also has a benefit that even the host of and the owner of the data can't see the computation that's being performed on it. So it has some really nice characteristics for us. And I know some of the collaboration that Jeb and I have had over the last couple of years has been focused on adding some of those capabilities, the hardware-based trusted execution environments for Hyperledger Fabric. Jeb?
I like the way you laid that out, Nick. And so rather than try to spin anything a different way, I'll try to add a little bit to each of the three categories that you introduced. So within the first one, I think there are probably people on the panel that aren't already familiar with federated learning and what that is. So I thought I'd add just a little bit of depth to that. Everyone is probably aware of AI at a high level. And of course, anyone in this forum is likely to be very much aware of the sensitivity and of data and the difficulties of working with sensitive and highly regulated data. So just to put a little bit more of a picture together of what this federated learning thing is, this is a technique that has just surfaced in the last couple of years that makes it possible to do collaborative training of an AI system without requiring the collaborators to share their data with each other. This is a really prominent and very important, let's say, emerging technology. It's not mature at this point, but it's getting there quickly. Essentially, it means that you can have a central aggregation hub that manages the overall system, and then collaborators, perhaps at different, let's say, hospitals, for example, who have data that can be used to create a model, an AI model together. For example, an example that we've been working on together has to do with tumor segmentation in brain scan images. You can imagine with GDPR and HIPAA regulations, it's very difficult to share medical data without going through a lot of hoops. But in this federated learning system, it becomes possible for, say, a dozen or 20 hospitals to collaboratively train a model using AI, typically deep neural networks, in a way that doesn't require them to share the actual training data. So I just wanted to add that little bit of extra information about federated learning, which I consider extremely promising, especially in light of what's going on in COVID and in the need for what has started to be called trusted AI. Now, on the second and third points, I think also very important, just to flesh out the second, what I think of as pure software idea, or the pure software approach to doing useful work on sensitive data without actually being able to see the sensitive data. Fully homomorphic encryption is, I certainly agree, one of the most promising capabilities there, but not the only one we're thinking about. There are several other techniques that allow you to do useful work on data that you don't actually have access to. Multi-party computation is another such, and another one that I consider very promising as well. There are other pure software cryptographic advances that I also consider very important, though for very different purposes. There are techniques such as what's called, almost humorously, ZK snarks, and other probabilistically checkable computing capabilities in emerging encryption. So for example, these might make it possible in the case of certain cryptocurrencies, for example, to run a computation and prove mathematically that you performed the computation without tampering with the program. You can have someone else run a program and then provide not just the output to you, the results, but also a proof that you didn't mess around with the program. Another area that I consider extremely important is privacy preserving identity. This is something I expect we will start to see integrated with lots of cryptographic systems and lots of AI systems over the next few years. The technology is 20 years old, but it didn't really become prominent, or it didn't get very much play until very recently, when there became a much more, let's say, important drive for privacy. It's possible to prove that you have the credentials to gain access to some good or service without revealing anything else about who you are. So you see the emergence of these privacy preserving and unlinkable credential systems. I consider these to be extremely important, possibly even more so than things like fully homomorphic encryption, and partly because of the third category that Mick brought up, and that is hardware-enabled advanced encryption capabilities. Trusted execution environments, such as Mick's own company, Intel, they produce a very prominent one, probably the most mature at this point, called Intel SGX, a trusted execution environment, which can provide you a hardware-rooted guarantee that your program is untouchable. You can't look into it, you can't tamper with it, and you get both confidentiality and integrity with a strong hardware guarantee. Now, AMD has another technology in this category, trusted execution environment for whole virtual machines. Our own Power Systems and System Z, the mainframe at IBM, also have trusted execution environments. So I would just point out that probably the most important work yet to be done over the next couple of years is driving towards some kind of standardization, which allows you to specify what characteristics you want in a trusted execution environment, and then, for example, allow your cloud provider to provide you with whatever trusted execution environment meets your needs. So I'll leave it at that.
That sounds great. Frank, would you like to make some comments about the blockchain solutions in this type of environment?
Yeah, I'm going to hit it from a different perspective, because I think you know, the previous comments really talked about how you build privacy in the computational frame. But I think we got to drive it a little bit from the identity perspective. I mean, we're talking about smart cities and really more and more smart devices. Everything really has a persona in cyberspace and an identity in cyberspace. And what begins to happen is that, you know, the owners or the systems behind there really start consuming that data in a way that encroaches and pushes against our whole privacy aspect. And with regard to health, we have this interesting dynamic of public health versus personal privacy. And we're seeing this play out in the whole aspect of this notion of a health pass or vaccine verification type credential. And so when we talk about privacy, we got to first start with the fundamental level. And I like the whole concept of privacy preserving identity. That's really pretty important. But again, when we start wrapping ourselves around these devices, the things we wear, things we may ingest, things we may insert into our bodies to help us from a broader health and lifestyle perspective, we become this data stream ourselves, and then where does that data go? Who owns that data? How, not only how is it processed, but what can people do with it? We've lived in this whole dynamic of this notion of data scarcity, that the more data as an entity I can accumulate, the more valuable my entity may become. But I think we're crossing this threshold in data abundance and really kind of pushing it back to the person and to the consumer. See a lot of regulatory push towards allowing us to own and control who sees and does what with our data. But again, I think there's this whole dimension, even the smallest transaction where I'm buying a soda in a convenience store. As we use less and less cash, these things are recorded, all these things about us, and then who controls the persona, our digital persona and digital identity, and how is that presented, throughout our lifetimes? I think when we talk about privacy in a smart city, we have to be very cognizant of that. And I know we're going to have a question on equity, and I think there's a whole digital access side of this as well.
That sounds great. Pam and Pierre, any comments before we move on to the next question?
Actually, before you move on, there's a related question from the audience that may be interesting too. So yes, the question is whether actually the experience of the pandemic has changed anything in the ways you approach this problem.
Well, from our perspective, I think it validated the need for, trust to reside in some other place than big tech or potentially a government. And, we pushed a lot of the boundaries to virtual interactions, particularly in the healthcare side of life. And the whole aspect of a digital identity or digital persona has really stepped to the forefront. So, what I think the pandemic did, in a good way, it busted down a lot of traditional barriers that inhibited kind of broader health access.
So I would just add to that. I think that what it really did was bring to the forefront the conversation. It really exposed the tension between the privacy and social good that can come from doing these computations. And whether it's the Google, Apple contact tracing platform or the health certificates that are now being available in the tracking of kind of authentic data that goes with that. Just one observation about that, though, is that it has exposed a different security threat to medical systems that a health certificate or a vaccine certificate has now become a valuable thing. And so forging those is now a threat that we didn't really have before. I mean, in the past, we've always talked about the threats to access to the data. And now we're talking about a new class of threats that are suddenly becoming exposed as personal data or personal health data becomes a commodity around which we can deliver services. So we have to be a little bit careful about all of the advances we've made are also creating new threat vectors.
I think you guys covered it well. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Pam and Pierre, last minute comments before we move on?
Yeah, just to build on what you just said, I think not only, all of that I totally agree with, but it also exacerbates the need of connecting two worlds that are more the consumer health and what I would call the professional health right now, and all that encompass in terms of challenges of cybersecurity, trust, owning the data, and these multi-sources, which have to live in an equilibrium, I would say, in a balanced world. And I believe the blockchain might be a great technology or key part of the solution here.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. My next question to the panel is about the challenges we encounter from social economic perspective as well as ethical perspective. And this question is for Pam and possibly Frank.
Yeah, so thank you. At SAS, we have a AI ethics group that really takes a close look at that. And we tend to look at it really through 3 steps to address it. And that first step is data, 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 of course. You need to provide the best possible data. You have to look out for biased data, biases in your data, and make sure that you really do have this complete and correct picture from which to train your algorithms. And then the second step is around oversight. So you need this system of governance. You have to have clear owners and stakeholders in your AI projects. This can be, sometimes it's a dedicated data scientist or an AI ethicist, but someone really needs to be responsible for the different policies and the protocols and all the compliance around AI. And we're starting to see the emergence of these chief AI ethicists in different organizations, and I think that's a really good thing. It shows a commitment to oversight. And the third step really is to consider the ramifications of new technologies. And some people use the term explainability. I personally think that explainability is a bit of a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but it's super important to be able to explain that underlying analytics and help to build the trust. But you really do have to just pull back from that and consider kind of the broader ramifications to new technologies, and especially how they'll impact some of the more vulnerable communities. And so I'll just leave it at that for the ethical AI. In terms of like looking more at the socioeconomic piece, we've been involved in a couple different areas around that. One is around COVID, where we've done a lot of predictive modeling for state and local governments, helping them to identify where the vulnerable populations and those with higher risk factors are. And so with that information, they can better implement outreach efforts and really help to improve the outcomes. The second example is around environmental justice. We're using analytics to identify and address environmental related health challenges in vulnerable communities. And there's a really strong mandate under the Biden administration to elevate environmental justice issues, not only at the EPA, but across governments. So again, that all starts with the data. And we've been involved in a number of projects related to data quality or looking at environmental and demographic indicators, and really developing some better tools for EJ communities to empower them to have a better sense of kind of the environmental impacts in their own communities, as well as supporting different types of policy developments and interventions.
That's great. Frank, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I'm going to take it from two perspectives. And when we talk about this whole data aspect within kind of a smart city health context, it really starts building on itself. We talked about identity, but really establishing that trust framework. And I trust the data and attestations around an identity, whether that identity is anonymized or fully presented as who I am. Can I control? Can I access? Through a consent layer, who can access? Not only for another person, I want to share with my doctor. I want to share with the workout partner, but I want to share with an AI. And then what can that person I'm sharing with, other entity I have, do with that data? I think that's pretty important. But what also is driving it, and I think we just hit on this, was a little bit of the social economic factors. There are a whole lot of factors that impact health, and social economic condition is one of them. It's the leading factor as an indicator for potential sepsis. But we also have to understand that as we drive towards some of this bifurcation, are we really creating, again, two stratas? We have 8 billion people on the planet, 3.7 of them don't have access to the internet. 5 billion do have access to a phone, but we start getting to this notion of we're starting to separate again between those in upper social economic stratospheres to those within lower social economic stratospheres, particularly as you move into developing countries. So I think it's important that, while I like blockchain, it could be an equalizer from the standpoint of truly establishing that trust layer and truly creating a broader outreach and inclusion in a broader shared incentive model, which is kind of fundamental to how these things work. So I don't think we can ignore that there's a whole lot of people on the planet that just don't have access to technology or internet or even a phone at this point in time. And so as we think through this, as we work down kind of access and deployment, that's got to be a pretty critical factor.
That's great. I believe Jeb had a comment there as well.
Yeah, a couple of things. I wanted to say something about the difficulty of dealing in AI with bias. Pamela brought this up, and it's super important. There are so many complex elements to this, but one of the things that I wanted to get across is that most of we see a very common and recurring theme where people end up training an AI that does something pernicious, does something bad, but when you look into the details of it, they didn't anticipate it. The problem was fundamentally not that they were just simply being thoughtless, as that they didn't go to enough trouble to think about unintended possible consequences. Bias is one of the more prominent ones, but there's more to it than that. In fact, I like to illustrate this through a short story, a real anecdote from early in the 20th century, 1908. There was a headline that came out, and I'll explain it in a moment. There was a story that came out of Paris, France, I believe it was, where there was a dog that had rescued a small child from drowning in the Seine River. And the dog was feted, celebrated, awarded with a big steak to eat. And then remarkably, a short number of days later, it happened again. The dog again saved a child from drowning in the same river. And then remarkably, it happened a third time. What had actually gone on here was the people had inadvertently trained the dog to push children in the water and then save them from drowning. This is very analogous to what's happening frequently in AI these days. If you don't very carefully take into account how you're training and the fact that your AI can learn things that you didn't intend it to learn, you can inadvertently cause harm. And that is the basis of a lot of the terrible stories that we hear about bias in AI. The other thing that I'd like to talk about on the socioeconomic side is that there's an element that is rising that isn't given enough visibility right now, and that is the rapidly accelerating, I would say, problem of automation, jobs going away permanently because of automation, largely enabled by AI. This is something that's been talked about for a while, and the effects are already becoming apparent, and they are accelerating because of COVID-19. Most of them are fairly subtle. Most of them you're not going to notice as overtly because, let's say, restaurants come back online, but they don't hire quite as many people as they needed to before because of other services like DoorDash and Uber Eats and things like that. And the fact that Amazon can now deliver what used to be Whole Foods in using automated factories to service their back end. A large number of jobs are going away, and I expect that this is going to contribute significantly to socioeconomic inequality. Okay,
any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, if I can just add one thing on this. There is a trap that we can fall into where we start to assume that the democratization and decentralization of blockchain solves a lot of these problems. It is a very useful tool and can be applied in very useful ways to address these problems. But as Jeb said, it's yet another thing that creates and introduces additional complexities that have to be dealt with. It's easy to talk about. I mean, we love Bitcoin as an example of something that's been popular and resilient and secure and immutable, and yet at the same time, there is in the systems that we're building, there's a very complex problem of how we do governance, of how we make things accessible. Just because you're using a blockchain does not make the application that you're building on that blockchain a good application. So one of the things that we've really been pushing in the work we've been doing is think first of the application. The blockchain is just a tool for building an application. And so the question is, are we building AI systems that are constrained on the biases that they introduce? Are we building systems that allow broad applicability with the set of tools that we have available? If it requires a high-end iPhone in order to be able to use it, that's probably not addressing the accessibility issue. I think the final thing is that we tend to think very US-centric in a lot of our applications. It's been very interesting working with some of the companies that we're trying to deliver to contact tracing applications and others for some of the African countries. It was a very eye-opening experience to understand what kind of infrastructure was available, and that we were actually going back to printed paper tokens that people could turn around and hand off. When you walked into a store, you printed out, or you had a printed out token for doing it, because they simply didn't have the infrastructure to be able to do it. So, when we think about accessibility, we've got to think, very broadly about it.
Okay, anybody else from the panel, or Dean Curry from the audience? Okay, we don't have any other questions. My next question is to Pierre. We want to get your opinion how the current pandemics accelerates the adoption of digital therapeutics, digital medicine, and how do you see this progression to proceed in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fact that the pandemic has put us, and many of us scientists, to try to find ways that we could measure things remotely, detecting early. I mean, in particular, I've been part of a project that uses smart rings to detect the likelihood of you having COVID about 2 or 3 days early. And that led to a lot of things. I mean, for example, here at the Institute, the Rockefeller Institute, people have thought, okay, maybe we can use all this technology now to use this to monitor patients, to detect recurrence of failures and things like that. And that creates all kind of great opportunities and challenges at the same time, because tracking these wearable devices that often are controlled by different companies that you need to trust in order to use this data and collate that data to electronic medical record data that is needs to be highly secured. I'm not saying they are, but that's the purpose. But also the liability incurred in those connections is high, so they need to happen in a perfect way. And so blockchain could be an opportunity to bring these different trust entities into a global trust, and also allowing for traceability between one devices that may not be regulated with a device that might be. I mean, just as an example, let's think about what the future could be. I mean, we see the Apple Watches and so on that now can look at your heart in a FDA approved way, but how does that connect into your healthcare day to day? I mean, there's a lot of things that needs to happen there. But if you think even the next generation about how your watch could control your pacemaker directly, and there are a lot of discussion happening at that level right now. How can we be sure about that traceability, that not someone else is using your watch right now that could actually alter your device? So there's a lot of doors that we are opening, and a lot of challenges that we all have to answer. But blockchain could be one key of the solution. It's for us to find out.
Right. Frank, you want to comment on that, since you are a blockchain person?
Yeah, I mean, I love that whole analogy, because when you look at it, and really the emergence of intelligence, I think we're going to see a lot of progress around the whole aspect of personal intelligence, these smart devices, and a little bit of an ecosystem, data ecosystem around ourselves. And a great way to govern that trust and access, can be through the mechanisms of smart contracts, in terms of how the devices can interact with each other and with you as a person, and in essence create this ambient twin of yourself that then can go out and do things on your behalf. I love that direction, from the standpoint of these things getting smarter, but a little more purpose built or special built, to when you couple them all together, you get a broader sense of intelligence. Big fan of kind of notion of swarm intelligence and I think a good data exchange mechanism. I think there's a lot of good data exchange mechanisms within blockchain constructs and how you attest and permission data, and even how you can potentially govern AI. And I like the future there. I like the possibilities there. So love that use case.
If I could just add also, I like the fact that we were talking a lot before about digital identity. And so if we bring this back into the concept of smart cities, smart buildings, this would be crucial, right? I mean, identity today, I mean, digital identity in most people's mind is what DocuSign brings us, right? It's a signature on a PDF. And is that what we call digital identity? It's not, right? We have to redefine what digital identity means at every level. If you look at what's happening, for example, for sharing data right now in any kind of human research, you need consent, right? And a consent is just a digital piece of paper. And slowly people adopt this electronic consent that is just DocuSign kind of concept. But we have to go way further in our definition, because this will govern everything we do, right? How we share, how we control, and how we can really bring these new technologies like AI in our day-to-day smart cities.
Right. Any other comments from the panel? Dinker, do we have any comments from the audience? Any questions? Okay, let's move to the next question. Our next, yeah.
No, I've muted when I tried to answer you, but go ahead, move to the next question.
Well, the next question is about adoption of telemedicine and telehealth. And let's start with definition, because these two concepts are sometimes used interchangeably while they actually have a different meaning. So can maybe Nick and Jeb address the issue of telemedicine, telehealth, first of all, define how they see it, and then look at the challenges of the full adoption of these two technologies.
I guess I can jump in there. I would say that the telemedicine and telehealth clearly have been adopted very, very quickly and in a generally positive way. But I think in order for us to move forward, as has been suggested by practically everybody on the panel so far, there are several technological challenges that we need to deal with. So to Pierre's point, I think that the right way to go forward with identity as far as telemedicine and telehealth goes is to adopt these new, better technologies that actually can, let's say, show that you have a credential and are permitted to do something, but without revealing anything else that's unnecessary to reveal about you. You might have to reveal your identity, but only certain, let's say, healthcare providers need to know other details, like, for example, what sort of procedures you've had done recently, what your age is, exactly where you're located. With more sophisticated identity and credential systems, you can overcome those problems under the principle that you only reveal information that is actually needed by the recipient of the information in order to do their job. So while I just absolutely applaud the amazing work that's been done in telehealth and telemedicine so far, I think we have a long way to go before we are where we need to be. Likewise, when we try to get the best that we can, the best outcomes from these systems, we're going to need to use AI. We're going to need to use AI in a way that is privacy preserving. And in addition to all of those things that we've already talked about with regard to privacy tech, we also need to deal with the problem of intersecting data sets. Now, this is something that is talked about a lot, that we haven't talked about it here, so I feel I need to touch on it. And that is the fact that when you have a data set that gives you a certain amount of information, it may be completely de-identified with regard to individuals. With a data scientist approach, it's very easy in many cases to intersect that private data set, a de-identified data set, with other data sets which will allow you to re-identify individuals by people that shouldn't know who the individuals are in a data set. And there are no perfect solutions to this problem, and yet it is a very widespread problem. There are partial solutions like differential privacy and k-anonymity, and they definitely have their value. especially in combination with other privacy tech like the privacy preserving identity credential systems and the private computation on sensitive data, such as those in trusted execution environments. But until we bring together an ensemble of all of these technologies and have it very well thought out, we're not going to be where we need to be with regard to, let's say, serving people's privacy needs.
So I'll second that, Jeb. As you know, I think the real challenge that we have here is, can we do computation on a data set without having access to the data set? And I think that's the promise of trusted execution and homomorphic and functional encryption and multi-party content. But it still doesn't prevent the results from leaking data. And so I think there's a real issue that we have to address there. What I wanted to come back to and sort of go back and address kind of Yelena's original question on the telemedicine, telehealth, really from a data perspective side of things. One of the big challenges here is the authenticity of the data. Because what we're doing as we move collection of data farther and farther away from the center, we have less and less formal methods for tracking it and managing it and maintaining it. It's no longer signed off, or it may be collected by an amateur. It may be that I'm doing my own kind of personal health analysis for it and collecting the data. That feeds into my personal records that are aggregated, which may feed into larger data collections that are processed. And even coming back to what we were just talking about, that we're doing computation across the collection of data sets and we generate a result. That result has provenance. It has a history for where it's come from. And one of the techniques that we can use in order to understand kind of the results and also what we're allowed to do with those results is to provide high integrity provenance for the data. And this in some ways is going to require us to rethink how we do data management, how we do data placement, and how we do data migration for it. It can no longer sit in big fat repositories on the edge. We have to be able to understand where it's going. And when we talk about blockchain, this is where I think some of the real promise is coming in. So we've got techniques for tracking digital assets. The Origin project and TruePic and some of the others are starting to work this way on images and media. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to start thinking about what it means to apply high integrity provenance to medical data. And are we in a situation where we need to do that? Which gives us a way of attaching rights and access policies and use policies for that data. There's one other thing that I wanted to just kind of bring up here for a second is really when we start thinking about those small things in personalization of data and moving things out, and I'm just going to throw this out there as an idea for some to think about, is we're already in this sort of transition for monetizing digital assets with NFTs. If I can go out and take a tweet and I can turn that into an NFT and I can sell it for $1 million, I'm sure you would all pay for my, tweet, pay $1 million for my tweet that way. But what really that transformation that's happening is that we are starting to associate licenses and notions of ownership and notions of control to smaller chunks of digital data. And when we think about it in the, sort of the popular thing with the NBA shots and digital assets that way, I just want to challenge us to start thinking about other practical uses that might have more long-term impact. And things like digitizing or commensuration of these smaller chunks of data related to medical, for example, might be an interesting opportunity.
That's great. I think Pierre and then Jeb had a few comments. Pierre?
And I have a slightly different perspective. So maybe Jeb, if this is related to this, you may want to go first.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to riff for a moment off of what Mick was saying and give you one particular concrete vision for what you're seeing there, what you're hearing about. One of the technologies that is related to trusted execution environments and has been recently related by some of us, including Yelena and Mick and myself, to blockchain is hardware-based attestation. And so when building a blockchain, such as what Mick envisions, that can trace the origin, the provenance of medical data, we now have the physical infrastructure just coming online that would make it possible for the devices themselves that originally capture the data to sign the data in such a way that you have a very strong so-called attestation encrypted in using encryption, that the data is what it says it is and originated where it claims to have originated. And if you tie all these devices into a blockchain, it's now very easy to envision a sort of an end-to-end comprehensive decentralized web of hardware-rooted trust in the attestation of the medical data itself. And when you combine that with a strong identity system, you can have doctors, for example, signing off on the fact that a certain instrument was being used by them on a certain patient at a certain time, and you can essentially build a comprehensive end-to-end system, cryptographically linked with no broken links in between, to guarantee the provenance as Mick was describing it.
Absolutely. Pierre, and then Frank had another comment. Pierre?
Yeah, same thing. If Frank wants to comment on that, I will. No, you're fine? Okay, so I wanted to go back to the telehealth really, and what are the challenges to my point of view. I mean, if we just go back, telehealth really got a boost from financial perspective, right? I mean, hospitals were trying to maintain income while patients couldn't come because of the COVID or because of the regulation that was preventing them to come to get their care. And this was just transition, right? So it became an interesting thing, and you saw doctors with iPads trying to do a conference with a patient, and all of that was built. So billing is definitely one of the challenges that will drive technology, as we all know. But here it goes a bit further. So I think the challenge is to see, now that we have opened the door, and I'm not saying it's a Pandora box, I think it's a great box, that we can, that people, I mean, there's a part of healthcare that can be done remotely. It's interesting, but if we limit that to just replicate telehealth as health being done remotely, but as a visit to your doctor, it's pretty, it's not very exciting. But I think by making this going into people's home, you're starting to migrate from a one-time, one-off kind of health interaction to a continuous interaction of health, and therefore going more and opening doors to preventive care, and therefore more data control, more data flow that needs to happen. And there is a shift that's happening, and I think it has been promoted by the hospitals themselves to actually take healthcare outside of the hospital. So I'm not sure if it was a good move for them, but in the end, by designing and we're talking about smart cities and the architectural and so on, I think it opens so many doors for how we will live tomorrow in a preventive care that will decrease cost in the first place, but also allow for only urgent care to be brought back to the hospital. So I just wanted to bring this perspective too, because telehealth and telemedicine is evolving. What we know about it right now is not what's going to be in the next few months.
Great. Frank?
I think it gives us an opportunity to create an everyday, all the time kind of engagement model. You know, when we talk about these smart devices and connectivities, almost an on-demand economy to our health providers. I think it's a whole new era of health that I think is going to drive a lot of costs down and hopefully improve the overall health and well-being of who we are. And I really like the whole conversations around how do you build smart and trusted data? I mean, that's been our livelihood at Burst IQ. How do you start with a data object that knows who owns it, knows its attributes, has security permissions that then can clump together, give you a picture of a person, place, or thing, and those things come together in trusted data sets. I think it's just all fundamental building blocks and how it all works. But what I like about all of it when you put it all together is in the notion of a smart city. And if we take it from a person-centric perspective, you know, I really would love to see the day in my lifetime where I have my own personal health, my own personal AI buddy that helps me in my health pathways, helps me on my skills and my learning journey maps, that's able to connect me with other intelligence, be it man or machine, to solve a problem in my life or to expand who I am and make me a better person in a way that is a trusted secure interaction, and with governance built in through some of these connect mechanisms. It's a future I'd love to see, and I think, you know, as we drive into not only building these deeper learning kind of systems, that we start these smaller little micro AI solutions start to emerge that can be hardware connected and trusted data connected. I think we're in for a really fun future with the right ethics approach to it, obviously.
May I interject here and say to Frank that maybe you should stick around for the session 2, because you will get a glimpse of what you're talking about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, now we come to the final question to the panel that I would like to ask all the panelists, maybe starting with Jeb, since he alluded to this in his first answer. Given the big variety of devices that are available now in the market, some are regulated, some unregulated, what is the role of interoperability, standardization, and how do we help this process to make this kind of Internet of medical devices, if you will, a reality that would enable us to actually function in real time and take advantage of this infrastructure?
I wish I had a concise answer to that question, but I really don't. Standardization is going to be extremely important, and there are some standards that are important already in for example, medical data. DICOM, HL7, for example, these are important standards, and new systems built on, for example, blockchain and other decentralized systems like that will certainly need to be integrated with those existing standards-based systems. I think, as I alluded earlier, there is also a need to do more standardization in the new emerging technologies, such as trusted execution technology. There's a forum called the Confidential Computing Consortium, which is making some early attempts at standardizing how you deliver workloads onto trusted execution environments. So I think that's very important as well. Interoperation between different blockchains also going to be important. There's some work going on there within the Hyperledger Forum, for example, and also some work in a number of academic settings. We have some friends up at MIT, friends at UMBC, who have done important and useful work in interoperability between blockchains. So I wish it was a simple, uniform answer, but other than saying rah, standards and interoperability, and emphasizing the importance of the ongoing work in that area, I don't think there's one simple magic bullet.
Great. Mick, you want to add something?
So I get to take the contrarian view, I guess, which is that I think interoperability it should always be an objective. It is never a reality. The reality is that we have to deal with heterogeneity. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, how do we create analytics? How do we manage learning in situations where we have data that has highly variable quality, highly variable trustworthiness, and other properties that make it computationally interesting? I'll just leave it at that. But I think the reality is that we have to learn how to deal with heterogeneity, because that's going to be the future that we end up dealing with in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with interoperability. It's going to be a challenge, and if we add, but I think if we can bring trust in all those systems that they can talk together, this is going to be crucial, and that's going to also reduce this battle of trying to see who owns the data, right? Because this has been a major thing by hospital. We own the data, we do this, and that's going to create more transparent data flow. Bring this back to who really cares about or owns this data, which is all of us, right? And if we think about, and you were talking about Africa, but if you're also looking in Europe, the HIPAA is the equivalent of HIPAA is GDPR, which actually brings control back to their users, and transparency is key, right? Being able to control your data anywhere. So interoperability is not definitely easy. It should be an objective. I totally agree. Probably never going to be a reality. So we have to be creative.
Great. Pam, you want to add a few things?
Yeah, sure. Again, it's, as everyone noted, it's a really complex challenge. We tend to see, standards are important, but APIs are really key to also enabling interoperability. And that's why SAS has kind of taken this API first approach to all our R&D. And we've got the kind of open platform story. So I think it's really powerful in terms of making it easier to integrate all these various inputs and from different devices and whatnot. But of course, you still can't forget about the data quality piece because it's highly variable as well. So that's on the technology side. I think it's also important to kind of look at the partnership side as well and kind of see that as an ecosystem of partners, if you will. And so SAS really has developed these ecosystem of IoT partners where we are actually building analytics frameworks into the systems. So a number of examples there in telehealth or remote medical as well. So.
That's great. Frank?
Yeah, I think I'll just echo all what everybody said, but I'm gonna go out a little bit in the future, because this is where I think kind of the coupling of all this stuff can really benefit. And that's context. I mean, one of the things with interoperability is context. I got to put things in a certain format in a certain way to be transacted. And if we're able to start, not only establishing some framework for how these things work and trust and some of that interoperability, but the data itself and even some of that data prep kind of technology and intelligence really is able to present things in the right context at the right time. I think we'll start seeing a whole new dimension in interoperability that we can't really approach in today's world that require these kind of fixed standards and fixed structures to make things work and make things interoperate. So I see a lot of good advantage in AI in the whole notion of context. And then again, we talked about governance, where we have this kind of distributed, kind of shared incentive model, blockchain like stuff with smart contracts and ledgers that can enforce how things are used within context.
That's great. We still have 2 minutes for questions from the audience.
Yes, there is one question which I would like to highlight. So one of our attendees is interested in hearing your thoughts about the tech innovations from the hardware side that may have an impact on healthcare, like 5G, edge computing, etc.
I guess the only response I'm going to have to that is that, as infrastructure improves, it opens a door to more and more data collection. On the other hand, garbage in, garbage out. It's really going to imagine it. What's more important is what we collect rather than the infrastructure for how we collect it.
Yeah, I'll add one little thing there. While I agree the infrastructure is certainly going to make higher bandwidth connections possible, more pervasive, better connectivity, I think what's maybe more interesting is the emergence of other modalities, new technology that will allow new kinds of information to be collected. One that I'll just highlight is I heard from a startup just a week or two ago about a new, much more inexpensive, much more biologically inspired electronic nose. We've all heard stories, for example, about how certain dogs can smell cancer. With the emergence of more scalable, more affordable technologies like electronic noses and dozens of others that I won't touch on, other kinds of analytics in the healthcare space in a distributed sense are going to become possible. And I'm very excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we think globally, I totally agree. I don't know if I can add much more to that. There are also the advancing more what we call the medical devices, which always is following up the global changes. But we know the companies like the big ones, Medtronic and others, or Abbott and so on, are driving a strong interest of these new technologies and how they can capture inside the body metrics that now can be transmitted and be part of our healthcare as well. So not only it's outside in our environment, but also within our own bodies. And the most one of the latest advances is chips in your head that can record signs of epileptic seizures and then counteract that directly with AI directly running into the chips into your brain. So this is there, but we have to remember that this is regulated, and so the technology often has a 4, 5, 6 year delay between what we can do today and what's really in your head.
Thank you so much. With that, I want to thank our phenomenal panel. It was a very productive and very informative. And I'll turn it over to Dean Khoury, who would continue with our program.
Hello and welcome back for the session 2. I'm Rudy el-Khoury, Dean of the School of Architecture, and I will actually moderate this session for you. So the Smart Cities Miami Conference is usually an opportunity to showcase the work of our own university community in the smart city space. And given the complexity of the city, this is usually a multidisciplinary affair with projects utilizing the range of expertise available at the U to drive innovation. So this year is no exception. And we have something particularly exciting to share with you, an inter and multidisciplinary project that reinvests the know-how we have developed with smart city research and practice and the problems and opportunities we face in the post-pandemic city. So representing on this panel the multiple teams that have joined forces in this effort are, in alphabetical order, Dr. Leonidas Bacchus, who joined the University of Miami as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences in 2010. He was formerly the Frank J. Derbyshire Professor of Chemistry at the University of Kentucky and Chair of its Department of Chemistry. As a distinguished analytical and biological chemist, he built a strong reputation for fostering interdisciplinary initiatives, heading a research group that brought together biological chemists, material scientists, toxicologists, and electrochemists to address some of today's most pressing issues. Dr. Sylvia Daunert is the Lucille P. Mackey Chair of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the Miller School of Medicine, Associate Director of the J.T. McDonald Foundation Biomedical Nanotechnology Institute, and Director of Research for the Center for Integrative and Complementary Medicine. Dr. Sapna is an Associate Professor and Graduate Program Director in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at the Miller School of Medicine. Dr. Deo's research interests is in the development of technologies for the detection of pathogens for resource-poor settings. Her work also involves the design of novel nanobioanalytical techniques based on luminescence and quantum dots for detection of microRNAs and RNA molecules for application in biomedicine, diagnosis, and pathogen detection. Dr. Nicholas Tsinoremas is the Vice Provost for Research, Computing and Data, and founding director of Miami's Institute for Data Science and Computing, IDISC, which was established to catalyze data-intensive research in fields ranging from medicine to earth science, urban planning, digital humanities, and business. He also holds faculty appointments in the Miller School of Medicine and the College of Arts and Sciences. Last but not least, Dr. Yelena Yesha, I introduced her earlier and you've heard from her in session 1. She is Chief Innovation Officer and Head International Relations for IDISC. Yelena is also the Director of the National Science Foundation Center for Accelerated Real-Time Analytics, CARTA. I will shortly call on my colleagues to flesh out the aspects of the project that are developing with their respective teams. But let me start with an overview of the project we are sharing with you today. Okay, and now I would like to share my screen. Okay, so please do let me know if there's something wrong with the images, and most importantly with the videos, if they're frozen. Okay, so the project we're sharing today is very much aligned with previous efforts which focus on the design of smart cities and actually basically a project that looks at the city at all scales. And this is what's exciting about smart cities, is the possibility of this kind of interconnectivity of all the constituent parts at all scales. This is how we constitute a kind of ecosystem that gains in efficiency and efficacy from the interconnectivity of its tightly woven elements, much like a natural ecosystem. So for instance, it becomes very exciting when your alarm clock is tied to the weather reports and the traffic data, so that it can wake you up earlier or a bit later, depending on the conditions today. So we have taken this kind of knowledge and know-how and this investment in, in integrating or embedded technology at every scale to a project that is now addressing healthcare in an expanded field. Our panelists earlier referred to this idea of actually imperative of having to move beyond the hospital at an expanded territory for the exercise of healthcare. And this is what we are doing, and we are thinking of this at all scales and in a network of different relations, from involving the clinic, the hospital, the pharmacy, and of course the home. And we are trying to actually find opportunities for exercising what we think are the four more important functions, which is monitoring, treating, communication, and data analytics at all of these scales. We are focusing on, now at this stage and in this presentation, on the home, because we see it ripe for this kind of a transformation to become an extension of the clinic and a primary site for healthcare. But here also I want to stress that we are not only speaking of the possibility of monitoring and treating acute conditions, but we are talking also about preventive medicine. We are talking about the possibility of actually thinking of this platform as something that addresses well-being as much as health. And we have...
excuse me. Can you actually put the slides in the presentation mode, because it's hard to see?
Oh my God, sorry, of course.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for noting that. So yes, so it's about disease, so diagnosis, monitoring, and treatment, but also it's about well-being, it's about nudging, it's about actually the kind of detecting patterns and delivering cues with ambient intelligence. So we have constituted for this project this amazing team, and that's what's so great about the University of Miami, is to be able to actually have this this kind of collaboration, which includes chemistry, computer science, biochemistry, molecular biology, medicine, and of course, design, our expertise at the School of Architecture. Here, I want to call out three people in particular, and who are really doing an amazing job at this stage of this project. Rad Lab supervisor Chris Chung, who is managing the project and producing the prototype that I will show you shortly. Lead designer Donnie Garcia, whose work actually as a student at RAD is at the source of this project, and research associate Jeremy Baum, who is working on the multiple embedded sensors that bring medical testing and supervision to the home. So that was this kind of team, and was this idea of a platform for healthcare and well-being. And we have these opportunities actually to reinvent the home as a site where we can do all kinds of measurements that may contribute to the data analytics and flesh out the picture and for the diagnostics and treatments. So, for instance, there are all kinds of possibilities with technology that we can do in the detection of pathogens, pollutants, contaminants, etc. But also the possibility of datafying all the environmental conditions that could come into play in the data sets with the correlations that may be fruitful in diagnostics and treatment. We emphasize detection and the technologies of sensing and detection, but also we are considering protection and with active and passive devices. I mentioned, for instance, that Dean Bacchus's team is developing a paint, like just a house paint for the walls that has a capacity to neutralize pathogens, for instance. Also, we have an opportunity to mobilize the smart appliances that we already have at home, but also all kinds of other IoT-equipped devices to do the work for us. So we'll be able to measure biometrics, vital signs, all kinds of activities, even affective states, you name it, down to eating habits and caloric intakes, which we have actually been addressing in this project. Also, in this ecosystem that we are deploying and designing, we foresee also the possibility of actually producing our own proprietary dedicated devices for measuring other things such as continuously. Actually, Pierre-François mentioned that the advantage of being able to measure continuously in the background and not only in the doctor's office or at the lab. This is a huge advantage that actually we are also integrating in the ecosystem here described. Oh, and like I said before, it becomes exciting when all of these things start to interconnect. Here's an example of how when one device detects a fever or the presence of a pathogen, for instance, the HVAC system may reverse the airflow in the bedroom of this particular person so as to create a negative pressure and mitigate the possibility of of contagion. That's one example. So, yes, the home is this primary site for this healthcare and well-being in an expanded field, and with all the embedded technology working for us in the background to accumulate the data and actually potentially deliver the therapy. But we think we have focused on the bathroom as a kind of examination room, and even more precisely on the medicine cabinet as the hub. It's like we are thinking of it as a health appliance that concentrates, that becomes the center point of this, the entire system for various reasons. But, so it's not only the kind of health dedicated appliance, but it could be also a very interesting interface and portal into the other smart systems at the home, becoming, for instance, a site for the data visualization gathered by all the smart devices you have already at home. So yes, so we moved from the city to the home to the bathroom, and now to the hub, the health hub. the medicine cabinet, which I'm going to focus on for you in this presentation. So that the cabinet really is like the microcosm of the entire system, because itself also encapsulates and concentrates those four main functions: monitoring, treating, communicating, and the data gathering the data and delivering and visualizing the data. So we think of it as like the Swiss Army knife of sensors. We like jam pack into it all the possible sensors that we already have and that we are developing. So it is designed to accommodate these kind of modular add-ons that incorporate different kinds of sensors and that could be customized, but also connects to all the sensors already that you have in your appliances, smart devices, etc. Again, to become the kind of clearinghouse of all the data and the site where all of this is concentrated and visualized. So the cabinet has this very interesting feature, which is the mirror door that functions, that has four modes. It can be just a mirror, but also it can be transparent, because we are using those new LG developed transparent digital display. So it can show you and highlight objects in the cabinet. It is interactive in the sense that actually we can use the digital image to overlay content or data on the mirrored image. So this becomes basically a mixed reality experience. Also, it is a portal to connect to the entire network, but most importantly to your doctor as a telemedicine interface. Here, the things we are interested in, for instance, is how do we improve the telemedicine experience? Now it's a laptop on your desk, and sometimes there are people around you at home. It's not comfortable. Here in the bathroom, in privacy of the bathroom, but because of the format, the life size scale, the vertical orientation, it creates a much more immediate, immersive connection, and also with your doctor, but also useful for better examination, because it has all kinds of things like light, dedicated, modulatable lighting, and actually other sensors that you can use in that experience. So quickly, I'm just going to go very quickly through some of the scenarios that we have developed with this. So this is like a daily routine check. In the morning, you get there, you are recognized by means of facial recognition. You have some day, each day, perhaps you have a different kind of test scheduled. It takes you through the various steps. In this case, it's a cardiovascular test, asks you to go through this. It's very interactive, visualizes the information with you, leads you through all the steps, visualizes also all the patterns and the data accumulated. And then here's another daily routine guiding you through the toothbrushing process, step by step, to make sure you are covering all the areas, and then you're done. Here's quickly another triage scenario where you are not feeling well. This is all, by the way, gesture controlled and voice controlled. You're not feeling well. You go through a set of questions and tests until it determines that, yes, you need to see the doctor, and you can immediately enter into this kind of telemedicine session if need be. And then you can use the integrated stethoscope, for instance, here, where the mirror can guide you exactly where to put the stethoscope to facilitate the examination. Finally, a third scenario where we have imagined a COVID-19 response situation where somebody's not feeling well. They go through the questionnaire that we are now all familiar with this, the health tracker, the daily health tracker at UM. And then here you it checks your oxygen level, and then the thinks that maybe there is cause for concern. Then it asks you to take, there's already a kit test for collecting a sample available. It guides you through the various steps on the mirror with this mixed reality experience, and then tells you that the UPS is collecting your sample. So this is what's important, is this possibility of actually connecting all the parts down to the dispatching the UPS truck, etc. So this is I'm going to show you in a video how this works. Let me know if it's frozen.
Good morning, Tony. It's 7 a.m. You slept for 6 hours, one of which was REM sleep. You may try to go to bed earlier tonight to catch up. Tony, it's time for your daily cardiovascular checkup. Today, your health checks include EKG and CO2. Start My Health to begin. Please select the test to start. Please follow the instructions shown below. Place your thumbs below the arrow on the sensor. Please wait while the data is being collected. Let's do a breathing exercise. Follow along. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Thanks, Tony. Please wait while the data is analyzed. Here is your weekly summary. This completes your morning checkup. Have a great day, Tony.
Now, another feature that is very interesting that I would like to describe in greater detail is this medicines cabinet capacity to organize and manage your drug regimen. So basically, has a system by means of computer vision, recognizes the optical tag that are placed by the pharmacy on the bottle, so it knows exactly what it is and what you're supposed to do with it, at what time, etc. You have to take it. So every time you open the door of the medicine cabinet, it gets that total view of the contents, identifies the bottles and where they are precisely, and actually plugs into the schedule and the instructions. So basically, it will manage that regimen, alert you when you have to take a bottle, and lays it out all for you easily as a schedule that is easily visualized. And this happens, it shows you the bottle because, like I mentioned before, the screen is transparent and it can highlight the contents of the cabinet by means of LEDs that are pinpointing the position of the bottles. So let me show you how this works here.
Good morning, Tony. It's 7 a.m. You slept for 6 hours, one of which was REM sleep. You may try to go to bed earlier tonight to catch up. Tony, here's your medication schedule for today. Right now you have a metformin pill. Please be sure you have not eaten before taking it. Here is the remaining schedule for your medicine today. You have to take captopril in 1 hour. We've noticed your metformin supply is running low. Metformin is on your automatic refill list and will be ordered to CVS. The order has been placed. It's expected to arrive on Monday morning. This completes your morning checkup. Have a great day, Tony.
Okay, let's stop here. So now you get a sense of the picture. I mean, there's the big picture, which really is to think of the healthcare and well-being in this holistic, expanded field manner. Thinking about it at all scales, but also the work we shared with you today, which is actually focusing on the home as a kind of an extension of the clinic, and most importantly, the bathroom and that medicine cabinet. So now what I would like to do is flesh out this whole scenario and this ecosystem that we are designing, and to tease out actually for our audience some of the aspects and the potential that are latent here. So let me start with, I'm going to start with actually Sylvia and Sapna, because it would be great to hear about the immense possibilities we have with the constellation of possible sensing devices and what we can do with them. And also the possibility of actually developing tests that could be integrated into this medicine cabinet and actually done at home. So I think there's a great future in these technologies. It would be great to hear from you about what we have in store and what we are going to be integrating in this project.
So do I start or do you start, Sapna? Doesn't matter. So, you know what, one thing that we need to think about is that there are two possibilities here. One is like, think about the medicine cabinet for well-being and for making sure that people who have already some illnesses, or like, for example, when Donnie was demonstrating, take your metformin, that is someone who has diabetes. So the Health Hub will help you with that. But another aspect that we can discuss is how it can help you to keep monitoring, say that you're a diabetic. Well, we can have integrated sensors within the mirror that will be able to detect the levels of glucose that you have currently and through the days, and obviously have a plot on how you're doing health-wise with regard to, in this case, say diabetes, right? So there are other kinds of sensors that we can integrate that can help you with your well-being. You can have physical sensors, like, for example, those that measure oxygen levels, those that measure an EKG, and CO2, for example. Series of sensors that can be different kinds of sensors based on breath analysis, like in these particular cases that I mentioned, or on physical, like, for example, the oxygen sensor that can read oxygen in your blood by just placing your finger into a little spot that is designed in the cabinet for that particular sensor, or placing your fingers in another location on the cabinet, which will read then your EKG. So there are different kinds of sensors that can be incorporated depending on what the function that you want and the function that you would like to use with your mirror. Also, and I let Sapna talk about the diagnostics aspect of the mirror, of the health mirror. But one thing that also we need to emphasize is that it can be tailored really for whoever lives in that environment. It can be someone who may have allergies, and that's when we integrate the environmental sensors that will read particulates and may affect your chronic allergy. It may be tailored to families who have children, and then you can be on the alert for potential diseases that children may have, or control depending if the child has some problem. It can be tailored to an aging population. And those, in those particular cases, the integration of the monitoring of the drug compliance, like when they take their medication and when they are out, it's critical and could be tremendously useful to help those individuals to comply with their medication and stay healthier. So, there are so many applications that is just like mind-boggling and really something that I think can aid a lot in securing the health of individuals in their own home without having to leave the home to go to either a pharmacy to purchase the medicines or to have to go to the doctor's office. So with that, I let Sapna talk a little bit, and then we can discuss and any questions that you may have.
Sure. Thank you, Sylvia. I think with the pandemic, everybody has become so much aware and also comfortable with, for example, sampling themselves and doing a test at home. And everybody actually prefers that. There has been a huge expansion in terms of point of care testing, at home testing. You guys, all of you may have seen advertisements on the TVs these days for Let's Get Checked or Everly, that they send a box and the box contains varieties of tests that you can do at home. But in reality, what they are doing is they're collecting samples. And this collection of samples really by yourself and mailing it somewhere has become much more prominent now, but this all started with monitoring of sexually transmitted diseases at the privacy of your home. And this idea that the collection of the sample is no longer a challenge. But if you collect the samples and mail it in, you still have to wait for 3-4 days, sometimes 1 week. And that delays the decision or the clinical management. So you would wonder if you can do that collection of the sample and also the testing with simple devices or with simple paper strip type tests. For example, like pregnancy test is done and the results uploaded into something like the health mirror, and that gets sent to your doctor, your nurse right away, and you get results immediately. For example, this is especially important with children. How many times that children have some fever and we run to the emergency rooms and urgent treatment center and wait for hours to just get a swab and tell us, oh, they have strep throat or they don't. One can imagine doing just that at home. Babies' collection of urine and poop samples from their diaper, much more easy. And you can do it at home. And if you can do those types of tests at home, but also you have access to the doctor through the digital mirror, you are inputting all your results into the mirror, and there is an algorithm set up there. So the decision making is still done by healthcare professionals, but everything done at the comfort of home. And all of these days, collection of breath and testing for many different biomarkers in breath, urine samples is easy to collect, finger prick is easy to collect. So all of these can be done, and with the pandemic in the background or still in the forefront, however you want to say it, this has become point of care test, and many different point of care tests will be available, and will make it very easy in terms of monitoring health at home.
Great. Leonidas, maybe you can add something about the environmental sensing possibilities. For instance, earlier Pierre-François mentioned about how one thing is to actually examine someone and take tests at the clinic, and another thing is to observe them at home in their environment, and then to get a continuous reading of the things you like to measure, but also to get readings about the context that they are immersed in to aid in the diagnosis. Could you maybe elaborate on this and tell us about the potential we have now in designing our system?
Yes, thank you. I mean, pretty much all of us spent about 90% of our time indoors, and most of that time is at home. And we're accustomed to put sensors at home. I mean, pretty much every house has to have a smoke detector, a heat detector, a carbon monoxide detector. And now more and more are putting a humidity detector and temperature so they can control at least mold. But what we envision is something different, right? Because as you look at the home, it's an environment that continuously changes. The temperature will change during the day, the lighting will change throughout the day. So if you want to control the home environment in an optimal way, you need to understand the air through which you live, the air through which you live and breathe. So yes, you're envisioning an air system, as you saw in the presentation, where air comes from the outside, is filtered, is treated. In other words, you may, now with COVID, we can use UV light to decontaminate in terms of bacteria and viruses. But that has to be dynamic. What do we mean by dynamic? It needs to be able to understand, and you saw one application of this in the presentation, when there may be somebody that is sick in the building, in the rooms. And at that point, the air circulation may go at a different pace. So the turnover of air in the room will change. That will be done automatically. You have the smarts in the system to do it. So we need an air exchange technology that is adjustable. And that should be coupled with sensors. And what type of sensor we're talking about? We have the capability to measure things like volatile organic compounds. We already know that a lot of those come through outgassing. So new furniture furnaces will provide that. But it may be coming as you bring in from the outside. Your work environment may have this in them and you bring them home. But we need to be able to sense that and be able to react with appropriate technologies. And one of the technologies we're thinking about is active surfaces. They can be an active surface, like the surface of a table that automatically decontaminates something that is dropped on it. In other words, if bacteria are on the surface, they will be decontaminated. It can be an active wall. It can be an active window that continuously generate intervention that anything that will come next to it will be decontaminated. So this is the kind of technologies we have in mind. So how we purify the room from allergens, pet hair. You can think about smoke, odors, volatile organic compounds. A lot of you have heard about formaldehyde, and how to integrate now the environment in the house with the technology that monitors health. So we can provide a healthy and environment-safe home.
Great. Yes, this is a very exciting part of the project, and we're all anxious to see it develop. But now I'm going to turn to Nick and Yelena for the whole data aspect and the data security aspect, because of course what we are presenting here is a house that measures and datafies everything. Perhaps this is a nightmare scenario for some, and we do have ethicists working for us to negotiate this issue. But now it would be great to get the fuller picture about what the big data and the data analytics potential is.
Great. I mean, Yelena, you want to go first, or you want me to go first? You go ahead.
I can say a few words.
You can start.
Okay. First of all, a phenomenal opportunity, and I would like to capitalize on this amazing sensing technology that we already have at the University of Miami. So what we are offering in iDisk is an opportunity to actually go to the next level and fuse the data, because all these innovative sensors are nothing else as Internet of sensor devices, Internet of medical devices. But we need to be able to seamlessly real-time integrate the feeds from this data in continuous fashion and make sense of this data. In addition, as Rudy mentioned, and a few other speakers in the previous panel, we need to be aware of ethics issues, but also we need to have a patient consent. So in a sense, each individual resident of the house should agree that his or her samples will be actually shared with the doctor, shared with anybody who would actually go and have an access to this medical data, right? So we are looking here at privacy preserving security issues of individual health data and maybe information about their home. For example, they may have radon, right? And they don't want to know people that they have radon because it may reduce the value of their homes, right? They need to know it to mitigate the problem, but of course they not necessarily want anybody else to know about all these issues. So there are individual kind of very personal information about their health situation, where we'll need patient consent, that we are solving by utilizing the so-called converging technologies of AI and blockchains to provide these contracts that would exist in a very kind of immutable fashion to support this kind of activities. And the next thing, we want to build intelligence on top. Like Sylvia and Sapna mentioned, all these devices will produce all this data, but we need to fuse the data, we need to clean the data, and then we need to make sense. We need to have actionable data real time that would assist the doctor or the medical professional on the other end at the point of care. So we are not replacing here a medical professional. We are actually bridging the gap between providing healthcare in the remote environment versus having it into the physical environment. So again, we are looking here at the number of converging technologies that are fused together with a very novel accelerated platforms that we have at iDisk that would enable this type of computation. So Nick, you're next.
Great. Thank you, Yelena. I mean, I think that, well, the idea here is that you heard the great panel here, and the group that we put together. So, and you heard the previous panel talking all about the data. So here is that we're bringing, the healthcare at home and what that means, right? So currently, if you look at the healthcare 20 years ago, it was more at the hospital. 15 years ago, it moved to the ambulatory clinics, basically to the doctor's offices and so forth. But what we didn't really have so far was actually the continuous healthcare and the continuous collection of data, whether this is, the EKGs, but also it's actually the fitness and the Fitbits. So the last 5 years or more, we see actually that the healthcare is moving more to the home. So, and this is what we're trying to capture. And of course, it is a nightmare, for people like me and Yelena in terms of the data, but it's also kind of an opportunity and a candy store, if you will, in terms of, having all of this data that you can actually, as Yelena was saying, that you need to bring it together, you need to analyze intelligently. You need to see the new technologies that are coming in, because, where are all these data? So you see this kind of health cabinet, health mirror, and so forth, right? It's a very smart computer by itself. And also it interacts with a lot of other parts outside your home. So the security component becomes very important. The other part that I wanted to make a little bit of a distinction is about telehealth and telemedicine. So telehealth is about collecting the data and collecting continuously the data so you can make good decisions. And in the future, we are also looking actually some of these decisions, that you make as a patient, some of the decisions that made by your provider together with the patient, and some of the decisions in the future, and someone in the previous panel mentioned, is that there is an AI that helps you actually manage your day-to-day activities without having to go to your physician, every day. And then the telemedicine, which is the telemedicine actually is an important component. This is where you come into contact with a healthcare provider. And through actually the health hub, if you will, we allow this kind of interactions in a secure way. So, you have to see this a little bit on the totality of the data, of the collection of the data, how you analyze the data, and how you are actually being able to make real-time decisions, you as a patient, but also access to your providers, and in order to continuously understand your state of health, if you will, because that's why we go to the doctor, right? We don't want to necessarily to go to the doctor when we have symptoms. We want to understand, to live a healthy life. And I will stop there.
Great. So yes, what we are creating basically is like a new object or device category, which is the health appliance at home that concentrates all the technology, but also is the site for the aggregation and the visualization of the data. So Nick, you mentioned all the things we are currently doing with, for instance, the metrics gathered from activities, athletic exercises, etc. But it's always hard to actually get to this information when this is all laid out and presented and visualized by that dedicated appliance. Maybe it acquires a different kind of weight or meaning, especially when it's correlated with other parameters. So we are running out of time, or actually we did, but maybe I'm just going to leave one more opportunity to our team here to maybe underscore one point or add another insight before we move on.
I want to say that, well, this is actually an incredible effort. I think that we create a whole ecosystem here. I think that we have put a great team together here at but also we are looking forward to have partners outside for other academic institutions, but also industry to develop, a lot more, this concept of the health hub as we see it. So I just thought that that would be an interesting and important point to make.
Yeah, and I would like to say that, the integration of state-of-the-art technologies in sensing with the data acquisition and handling in a protective way, and then being able to communicate with the physician and the healthcare providers in a seamless way, I think it's a totally novel concept that does not exist. I mean, like we have the Fitbits of this world, we have the Apple Watches that will tell us some information, but it's not like a holistic total approach as something like the Health Hub will have, because we are, as Leonidas brought up, we're looking at the environment of the household and how it will affect our health as well. And we go one step further to where we have achieved right now with point of care tests and devices. We are going one step further by being able to integrate it in the household and not mailing it, not having to mail it as all these other tests are being that are in the market are, but actually being able to self-perform, but without making yourself the decision, which it would be a dangerous proposition, always linked with the health provider. And that is thanks to all the infrastructure created by the wireless communication and data acquisition and sending it off to them. So to me, it's very exciting as someone who is in the healthcare field.
Great. We conclude here. We've already encroached a bit on the next session, and thank you all for joining us. We'll keep you posted on the development of this exciting project. Thank you.
Great. I think I have the distinct pleasure actually to introduce our next plenary speaker, which is Dr. Mark Wolff. So Mark, actually Dr. Wolff has more than 25 years of experience in healthcare, working in the US and Europe. He's a recognized, accomplished practitioner and thought leader in the development of applications of advanced predictive analytics to complex problems in healthcare and life science industries. His current work is on the development and application of machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches to real-time sensor IoT data in support of health outcomes, safety, visualization, and development of intelligent decision support systems. So today's talk is going to be, and we have it here, I think it's going to be your digital twin. Very excited, very great to talk about your digital twin. We'll see you now, how the Internet of Medical Things and edge analytics are changing the healthcare. Mark?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will share my screen now, and hopefully there will be no technological issues. Put it into presentation mode. And there we go. Yes. Thank you so very much for that introduction. Thank you to the University of Miami, the School of Architecture, and of course, the Institute for Data Science and Computing. And of course, I want to take Dean Khoury and Dr. Yesha for the invitation to speak. I'm very excited. I very much enjoy sharing the work I do. So what I want to do today is talk about the concept of digital twin in healthcare. We all know of it in the industrial world, but what about in the healthcare space? And more importantly, I want to give a little history. I'd like to discuss just a few definitions, and then also actually a use case where I built a digital twin. And hopefully I can all do that in the 19 minutes that I have left. But let's begin with some history. It is interesting that for many, many years, people have been trying to understand things like, how do we reason diagnosis? How do we reason therapeutic decisions? And there's a paper published in Science that tried to address that issue. And more importantly, this paper came up with 3 very important conclusions. So the first was that there is tremendous interest in the use of digital technology to aid the diagnostic process. Well, that certainly isn't anything new. That in order to use computers and to aid diagnosis, one of the fears was that somehow computers would, quote unquote, take over, and that we would lose some human oversight over the diagnostic and therapeutic process. And finally, the ultimate conclusion of this paper was that the ability to make a more precise diagnosis and a more scientific determination was actually tremendously valuable, and that we should continue down this path. This paper was published in 1959, and I would argue that today, even in the context of COVID and the dramatic changes and accelerations actually that has brought in healthcare, we are still talking about the same 3 things: the value of digital technology, the fear that somehow it would overcome human decision-making, and finally, our understanding that it is the right path forward in terms of efficiency, accuracy, and so on. So to that end, where are we today? Well, we have made progress, and clearly COVID has accelerated that progress. I would say many of the concepts here, for example, around digital health have existed for some time, but have now been put into practice and into the development by necessity. And so the FDA, an organization with whom I've worked with in the past in my position at SAS, now has this formal concept of digital health that many of us are aware of. And interestingly enough, it talks about new stakeholders in the approval of and the evaluation of the safety and efficacy of new drugs and medical devices, and that these new stakeholders represent patients. Certainly by their patient initiative and patient preference initiative, they are now introducing patients into the decision-making process. Not only healthcare practitioners, which traditionally have actually not been included in the FDA's process, believe it or not, but now researchers and non-traditional elements such as application developers and software developers and software companies, leading ultimately to this concept of software as a medical device. And the FDA, as you know, probably has published a digital health initiative action plan and many, many recommendations and guidances related to digital health, telemedicine, telehealth, and all the topics actually that we have been discussing today. So now, a couple more very quick definitions. I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone what the Internet of Medical Things is. It's essentially connectivity, sensors, but applied to health, meaning wearables, formal digital diagnostic devices, and the ability to connect them, collect data from them, and analyze those data in a new way that we have not been able to do before. More continuous data, less data only when we're sick, but potentially now data, as was discussed a moment ago, data that are collected when we're healthy, which may be even more important than the data that we collect when we're not feeling well. Further, this idea of edge in the sense that sensors or devices that are collecting and transmitting data can actually have a level of intelligence, or more precisely, can actually do scoring at the edge. So a device that is monitoring some physiological parameter, that device does not necessarily need to transmit a continuous high frequency stream of that parameter, but rather has the quote unquote algorithmic intelligence whereby only exceptions to nominal can be communicated. So in effect, that device is monitoring for a particular event. And when that event occurs, it can alert or signal some next action. So edge analytics will become very important, particularly as we can't possibly store all the data. We may be able to use edge analytics to actually filter what we store and only keep, so to speak, the important bits. And finally, this concept of a hyper-connected patient. The idea that our wearables and I've been speaking to this actually over the last few years, and I'm so happy to be part of this discussion, the environments. I very much believe that we are not just going to collect data from what we wear or what we swallow or what we have implanted in us. I very much believe that the environments within which we exist will also collect and communicate to us. And I think actually that is a critical and important component of sort of the IOMT. And of course, we've discussed briefly the idea that connectivity, 5G, less latency, more bandwidth will actually drive and facilitate a great deal of this. And getting toward the end of sort of defining and trying to understand how I put into context the digital twins, this idea that digital innovation is actually creating transformation. Remarkably, this slide from Deloitte is pre-COVID. Yet if you put it in a post-COVID world, it is prescient almost unbelievably. And what is really fascinating is not just the identification of the various elements of telehealth, telemedicine, sensing, and remote medicine, not only what it can do and the value it can bring, but I find here on the bottom, this idea of the barriers and the benefits. And one of the more incredible benefits is convenience. 64% of people in this study, consumers, said convenience. Now, think about other digital transformations in our lives and how the role convenience played, whether it's shopping, whether it's banking, many of the digital interactions and over the internet interactions we have given up a great deal. We have abandoned a feeling of risk. I remember when people were afraid to shop on the internet. Now, look at Amazon. I remember where people were afraid to do telebanking. Well, the convenience has overwhelmed some of our fears. And I very, very much believe that the convenience aspect of digital technologies, of sensing remote medicine, remote patient monitoring will overcome some of the barriers that we will face. So to that end, very quickly, when we talk about digital innovation, from my perspective, one of the most profound transformations is this idea of how software is changing how medicine is practiced, and even how medicines and medical devices are discovered and approved. Software is fundamentally driving change. And one of the revolutionary developments is that now the regulators consider software or an algorithm as a formal medical device. And by medical device, we mean the capability to diagnose, to suggest treatment, and to inform clinical management. This is exactly what that 1959 paper was getting at. And indeed, there are still some concerns about the relationship between software and human decision-making, but there are now papers and references that cite not using computer algorithms to better diagnose and make treatment recommendations is not inefficient, is not maybe inappropriate. It's becoming unethical because we are not doing the best for the patient. And if an algorithm can support human decision-making, not to use it is unethical by many researchers. So to that end, the Internet of Medical Things and software as a medical device will dramatically accelerate digitization in clinical research, as I said, development, and as we're seeing today, care delivery. And it will bring to the fore this concept of what I call digital twins. Not digital twins necessarily as an entire body, for example, but rather systems of the body and how those systems then interact with each other. So what do I mean by software analytics and how we're making this possible? Very briefly here, because I don't want to recapitulate what you all know, but the traditional analytics lifecycle: collect some data, store it, analyze it, create a report, use those data to create some sort of algorithms that do further, deeper analysis, put it back into the data, bring it back out, make more reports. And recently, we're adding streaming data, but fundamentally nothing really here creates a real-time, a dynamic, or a highly interactive world. This is still a kind of linear analytic process. What has changed today is that the streaming data need not necessarily go into data and through that linear process. Today, streaming data can be actually used to be scored in real time. Exactly what the brain does, right? We are sensing the world around us, and we're not putting that into memory, thinking about it later, and then reacting. We are taking the sensory data that we experience as human beings, and we're processing it in real time, effectively doing streaming model execution, and then we're producing some sort of response. Now, bring that in with that traditional system. That is where you truly create a reactive and a learning system. So what is different today is this idea that we have high frequency, high volume streaming data that can be acted on in stream, but also supports the more traditional analytic methods. And indeed, this is how we will create adaptive, intelligent systems. And as I said, they feed then a training and a model building process. Okay, really quickly, digital twins. Software representations of physical assets, processes, or even simulations that are designed to help us understand that process in silico. Many of those exist today in the industrial world: locomotives, jet engines, cars. How do we bring this technology into representing a heart, or a lung, or the musculoskeletal system? And how can we use that not only to understand pathology, but then to actually model individuals, ultimately giving precision and personalized care so that when we look in that mirror, the comparator, the nominal, is my digital twin. And it's informing me not just how I'm doing, but from a reference point of me as a nominal entity. Okay, so that means that we're creating a kind of digital version that could be anatomical structure or system, or here, an environment as well. So that way we are sensing not only who we are, but where we are. And environmental conditions, of course, become very important. So let's get to very quickly some applications, and then actually in the few minutes I have left, I want to talk about actually an experiment that I did. So tremendous application in twins. It could be from operational scheduling, for example, build a digital twin of a surgical center and scheduling and staffing. It could be from clinical, where we collect data and we use those data to compare a patient we're examining. And finally, in research, in terms of clinical trials, already we have concept of synthetic treatment arms and so on. So this is a broadly applicable concept. Okay, let's begin with the use case. I was actually asked once by a pharmaceutical company, could we use technology to add value to a medicine? And I thought, I have an idea. What if I used sensors, gyroscopes, accelerometers to measure a movement and correlate that movement to pain as a function of a disease? I happen to be an arthritic, and so I had an idea of how to use myself as a guinea pig. So what I did was I used a sensor and a gyroscope, and I developed an algorithm that actually measured how effective an analgesic was for me when I walked, in terms of how much pain and stiffness that analgesic was eliminating. And I was working actually in this case with Intel. They provided me with a lot of hardware and support. This took only a couple weeks to do. And from that, I literally developed a method to quantify pain. We developed global standards of how to compare one person to another. We took more machine learning approaches then to begin to develop automated clinical assessments, basically digital twins of musculoskeletal systems. And finally, we started to work on developing therapeutic, basically clinical decision support systems. How did we do it? How did I do it? Well, I woke up one morning extremely stiff, having a bad day with my arthritis. I had an app on my iPhone that connected to the accelerometer and the gyroscope. I put it on my shoulder. I started to walk across my bedroom, just a few meters back and forth, and I measured that walk. I took a bunch of my medicine. I measured that walk again. Here we have the de-anonymized patient wearing the iPhone with the app running. I measured 6 parameters at 100 hertz. And from that, I got an XYZ 3-dimensional version of how I walked on medicine and off medicine. Later, we did some more modeling. We introduced video analysis. Imagine a camera in your room, or inserts into your soles, or sensors in the carpet that measure the physics, acceleration and rotation. And we also now have joint position measured by cameras. That produced an incredible model of muscles and bones moving with and without pain. The modeling was relatively straightforward. I actually managed to do it myself. And then finally, we built a prototype where we had the physics, the imaging in a room. You could go in, do a few procedures, just as you see here, sit, stand, and we could score you for how well you're doing in terms of pain and stiffness, and calibrate that against whatever medications you're on. Well, I really needed a really good test to test this algorithm. I actually happen to have identical twin daughters who also suffer from autoimmune disease. And one is in a lot more pain than the other. Just by the nature of the human immune system, just because you have the same genotype does not mean you'll have the same phenotype. That is how the genes are expressed. So one girl is in a lot more joint pain than the other. What I asked them to do is to provide me with data that they were sitting, standing, putting their knees up and down. I could not tell from this who's who. And I could certainly not tell by their motion who is and isn't in pain. Just like when you go to the doctor and they ask you to walk across their office, how can they tell really what's wrong with you other than for gross abnormalities? Using algorithmic assessment based on physics and motion and scaling to titration by analgesic, I was able to develop an algorithm that accurately scored who was in pain and who wasn't, sitting and standing, and to what extent and by how much they differed. Purely algorithmically based assessment of how they feel, not asking them on a scale of 1 to 10, but rather measuring them using sensors. Now we literally and figuratively have a digital twin of the musculoskeletal system, not only for myself and arthritis, but also in the girls in joint pain. From that, we developed an assessment dashboard where we could pick a test, turn on the sensors, and in real time score any number of parameters. So a physician could do this in a clinic, or we even developed a system by which you could be monitored at home following a procedure or some chronic disease. Here, the idea was that we're measuring motion following total knee replacement. And you don't have to go to the clinic. You just do this assessment at home. And you could do it with an iPhone, or you could do it in a room that has embedded technology. And with that, with 1 minute and 19 seconds left, let me get to the end. What did I learn from all this? Well, I'm a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. I'm a huge fan of the methodology, the stories, and there's this wonderful quote in one of his stories called The Sign of the Four. And Sherlock says to Watson, Watson, while an individual is an insoluble puzzle, in the aggregate, he becomes a mathematical certainty. What Sherlock is saying is this to me. If we take a lot of people and we connect them, and we connect the environments they're in, and we create enough data to represent a digital twin, essentially an algorithmic version of what is nominal or what is pathological, we can use that and reflect that onto an individual and do what? Better diagnosis, faster diagnosis, more precise diagnosis. We actually achieve that vision from 1959, and we do it today, and we do it with technology. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for your attention. It looks like we have 10 seconds left for questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Mark, for this exciting and very passionate presentation and very, very exciting, I should say. So we have actually some time for a couple of questions, brief questions, and so forth. I see a few in the actually on our Q&A, but let me try to actually aggregate a couple of them just very quickly. We have a couple of more questions. Actually, so some of the things that actually they're coming in is about how you think that actually we can create a digital twin based on the about the mental health. Right, so some of the things that we were talking actually before and so forth, right? So it's something that it's measurable and so forth. Mental health is very important, and COVID-19 is showing this to us more pronounced. So we have a number of different questions. How you think about, we can actually evaluate our mental health, and as you mentioned, one visit to the doctor is not necessarily, or a questionnaire is not necessarily perhaps the most effective way.
That is a wonderful question. I actually am on the board of the University of North Carolina Center for Community Mental Health. And I'm on the board as a representative of a technology company and the work I'm doing in technology, and trying to understand how technology at home, technology on the person, both hardware and software, can support better mental health oversight, better mental health care, and actually anticipate and provide a level of sort of monitoring. And absolutely, there are many interesting ideas of how through machine learning and through AI techniques, we can correlate behaviors, we can correlate how the body moves, reacts, we can correlate physical parameters that we measure in with a high degree of specificity and sensitivity that actually can act as surrogates, or what we call digital biomarkers, for potential issues of depression, for potential maybe forward-looking in terms of how activity and behavior correlates to episodes of depression, how we can look at the body's change in its daily activity, sleep, and how we can correlate that to elements of mental health. Tremendous amount of interest, terrific levels of ideas from different people. And the idea now is, from the research community, is how then can we start to evaluate. I know that in my work with some of the pharmaceutical industries, one of the most difficult clinical trials to run is often a CNS or depression trial because of the incredible rate of placebo. That once you tell a person they might be being treated, of course they think, oh, I should get better. Imagine testing some of these techniques on people in clinical trials, let's say for depression, for example, and actually having the algorithm say, the person says they feel better, but really the data says they are not, and then correlating that to the therapy. So there are opportunities not only to deploy these technologies, but to test them and clinically validate them to see whether they are useful and helpful for people.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I think, we're a few minutes, so I think that most likely we need to wrap up now. I'm sorry, there's a few more questions, and thank you all. Thank you, our attendees, for staying with us during this conference. So I think that I'm tasked to do the concluding remarks. I would like to thank our plenary speakers, Mark and Michael. Also all of our panelists for the great discussions and interactions that we had. I hope that our attendees enjoyed this. And this is actually our fourth Smart Cities conference with a special focus on health this year. The previous years, there were in-person meetings, and we hope that in the post-COVID era, we will welcome you and we see you in the next time in person. Because some of the interesting aspects is that I think that we all enjoy the webinar and the talks and the lively conversations, but sometimes some of the interesting questions and the networking after the meetings are actually also a key part of this kind of conferences. So with that, I would like again to thank all the attendees, and a special thanks to the team that helped us organize this, Evelyn, Jackie, Michael, and Helen. And with that, thank you all. And thank you, of course, our organizer, Rudy, and special thanks to Yelena as well for putting this program together. So with that, thank you all. And I hope to see you in person next year at the University of Miami campus or in a venue in downtown Miami, because that's where we normally do our conferences. Thank you all. Thank you very much.